So welcome to all of you who have shown up, and to the people who haven't shown up yet. I guess you don't get the welcome that everyone else gets. I'm Bob Erteschak. I'm Yellowdig's academic lead, and some of you probably have heard of me before, and many of you may not have. So I'm just going to really quickly give you my background, and I apologize to those of you who have heard this story a million times. At the turn of the century, I was involved in online learning, where I was a faculty developer, instructional technologist, and I helped instructors back at that time put their classes online, their courses online, whether that was in a distance format or even 20 years ago in a hybrid blended format, which I thought was a really powerful idea, the ability to expand the classroom from beyond that face-to-face paradigm and allow discussions and conversations and critical thought to occur outside of the 50 minutes 3 times a week in class. But I found that the tools of the time and the pedagogy of the time, the learning management systems and the class and the online pedagogy really didn't allow that engagement and participation. It was a great, those tools were great for submitting assignments and for tracking students and things like that, but it really didn't create the community that I had hoped to create in online learning. I went on to teach political science for over a decade, and I used all kinds of other tools outside the learning management system to try to increase that engagement in my courses, using Facebook and Twitter in my classes, which was great because they had this frictionless sharing, but they really created a whole bunch of other problems, including ethical problems about, having students in those environments. And they didn't really give me any sort of great sense for what was going on behind the scenes. I discovered Yellowdig, and it really ticked the boxes as far as, for me, creating these really great sort of communities and the ability to inform my teaching. And I was lucky enough that they hired me, and I'm sitting here now. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Brian Burdine, in just a second, but I do want to mention one thing before I do that. So this session, this office hour session, we did ask for people to submit questions in advance, and there were a few of those that we did get, a number of those actually, I should say. And we're going to be going through those questions that we received in advance. We will also, when we're basically, when we've done that, we will go through questions that you submit in the Q&A here. The theory is, and what we found in practice in these previous office hours, is that there are a certain number of questions that we get from time to time. So getting them in advance before the session allows us to make sure that there's not a lot of duplication in the questions that we receive, and that we're going to hit what you want anyway. So feel free to post questions in the Q&A, but realize that they may be questions that we're going to answer anyway. If not, we will get to them as time goes on or when it's appropriate within the chat. So please don't be upset if we don't immediately get to your post in the Q&A area. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my fine colleague, our head of client success, Brian Burdine, PhD.
Hi, everyone. My personal background is all in psychology and education. So I got my PhD from Vanderbilt, went on to a postdoc at the University of Delaware, where I became an affiliated faculty member. During my postdoc, I started doing a lot of consulting with ed tech companies about how to sort of build better educational technology, and I really liked it. So got into the educational technology startup game, and about 2.5 years ago, I started with Yellowdig, primarily to do research on the platform and understand outcomes, how to drive better outcomes, and to start making good recommendations on the product that was going to really meet the needs of instructors and their students. The biggest challenge, I think, of my job is making sure that the things that we add meet the needs of both instructors and students, and the number of times that those don't align with each other is pretty surprising, or at least challenging. So one of the more fun and interesting challenges of my job is trying to make sure that we're making sort of two user groups independently happy. Um, uh, I definitely have done most of the research into the platform, and I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that we have today from that research. I also have some teaching experience as well. Without further ado, I wanted to sort of jump into just a real quick. If you've never seen the platform, this is a version of it in uh, showing on my screen right now. The main concepts are a single scrolling feed where students can easily share um, and and uh, and sort of interact all throughout the course. And I don't want to say a whole lot more than that. I'm going to assume most people have seen Yellowdig or have used it. Uh, but if you need more of an intro, or we're looking for more of an intro, definitely reach out to us and we can kind of give a full on demo.
Alrighty. Thanks, Brian. Let's jump right in, shall we? Hey, so Brian, I've been wondering about this, and we did get some questions about this, generally speaking. One thing that I think can help people is knowing where to go to answer questions. And Brian, do we have a particular spot that we might want to direct people to? The answer is I know this answer, Brian. Just being sort of silly here. So yeah, I'm even going to answer the question. We have a knowledge base that is going to be really helpful for pretty much most of the things that you're going to have questions about, at least as far as the basics of these things. So the Yellowdig knowledge base is a really useful spot. If you go to help.yellowdig.com and click on the icon to the left that shows Yellowdig Engage, that's where you're going to find a very well organized and well laid out sort of answers to everything. And if you go to that knowledge base, there are areas for instructors, there's an area for students, and there's an area for admins, and sort of some of the behind the scenes thing. And it will dive into all of the things that you want to ask about, whether it's course setup, whether it's using points. What are some of the other exciting topics in there that you
I
might
mean,
want?
we've tried to get an article for pretty much every question that we've been asked, but I think just going in and exploring the areas that are specific to your role would be a reasonable strategy. There is a search inside of there. The one thing that I like to point out or caution on right now is that we do have a classic version of the platform, which you may or may not be familiar with. If you're using our knowledge base, definitely pay attention that you're selecting Yellowdig Engage, and that if you do a search, that the article is relevant for Engage. And actually, one of the questions that we got asked today, I think, may have been because the person was looking at a classic article versus an Engage article. That would be one thing I would highlight to point out. Some other things that I think are super important on this page is there is an instructor certification course which walks people through how to use Yellowdig and sort of various pieces of getting the most out of the platform and some of the recommended pedagogy. There is also a student module within that instructor certification course that we could recommend to possibly include something like it in your own course. It's meant to be for students, and that's the thing that Cynthia actually mentioned in the chat. Um, uh, Before the webinar began. Um, that course, the instructor certification course, and the student module are both available in the Canvas Commons for downloading into a local instance. So if you're managing a lot of instructors as an instructional designer, it may be worth it for you to just download that course, customize it as you see fit for your institution, and then actually use that course to help train up some of your own instructors. Ours is always available, but if there was something you wanted to customize or highlight specifically, you can do that. This is also where you can contact support, see the status page for our website. There's a whole series of student and instructor videos and the orientation videos. And I assume most of you know, but we just recently released a redesign of the platform during the winter break. So we're working hard to update all of the documentation around the visuals of what that all changed.
And Brian, I was distracted because that's how it goes sometimes. Did you mention how to contact support while we were there?
Yeah, the link here at the top is one way to contact support. So if you just bookmark help.yellowdig.com, you can always find that link. You can also just email us directly at support@yellowdig.com. Either of those will generate a support ticket. But the thing I like about just paying attention to help.yellowdig.com is pretty much everything you could need would be here, and a lot of your answers you'll get quickest if you just do a quick search in the knowledge base.
All right.
It
So
was written by educators, not our engineers. So hopefully the knowledge base is actually reasonably easy to read and written in human language. I
plus
hope.
we have professors who are smart. So I think, I mean, I'm talking about you people who are going to be accessing the knowledge base. So I don't think it'll be a big problem there. So yeah, here is the list of questions that we received in advance. As you can see, we've sort of divided them up into sort of the more general type of questions. And we've actually sort of addressed part of that first question already about where to find instructions. And again, the knowledge base is where to go for that. You know, the second set of questions are, and the second question there is dealing with support, which we have also mentioned already. If you have issues with Yellowdig that are technical issues, you should either go to that link in the knowledge base and contact support, or email support@yellowdig.com. That is always going to be your best bet for the quickest response to any kind of technical issues that you're encountering. The second set of questions that we'll go through are a number of questions dealing with points and how they work and how to set them up and how to make adjustments to them. And then finally, we'll talk about class size and what our recommendations are with regard to that. And there's also a question about certain types of posting, and we'll talk about that. So, drum roll, here we go. Go ahead, Bri.
Yeah, the first question there, I mean, I think we said where you can find some of the documentation, and sort of how to set up the LMS. There's a specific article in the knowledge base about sort of a quick start guide. Uh, the question about how to prevent duplicate accounts. So the way that the LTI integrations in Yellowdig work when students are coming from an LMS is you put a link inside of an individual course, and when they click on that link, some information is sent from that course uh, shell to our system, which tells us basically the identity of the student and where they need to go, as in which community is associated with that course. The first time that you do that, there is no course, there is no community set up for that course. So as an instructor, it'll prompt you to create the community. Once that community is set up, it's linked to that course. And when students come in, if they have an account already from Yellowdig and we recognize their identity because they've launched into another course or something like that, we automatically add that course to their existing set of course communities. And so they shouldn't get duplicate accounts as long as they are launching from the LMS with the same credentials that they launched previously. Um, if they happen to launch with different credentials, there are ways in all of these flows that students can find an existing account. And one of the principles of Yellowdig is basically that we've tried to make it so that somebody signing in from a learning management system or signing in at yellowdig.app um, should be able to find their account or authorize into that account uh, um, via an email authorization in order to be able to add communities to their existing account, sort of no matter how they encounter it. If you're experiencing a lot of students getting duplicate accounts, we should probably talk about um, sort of the use cases that might be causing that, because it shouldn't be a common occurrence generally. Um, And the setup for students from course to course is literally just clicking a link from inside of that course, and getting in, and then they can go to their next course and click in and get in. And as long as they're clicking a graded assignment link within that course, that will also set up their individual passback for each individual course.
Brian, do you think it'd be worthwhile to jump into the platform and show how to switch from community to community?
It may be worth doing that. So certainly, as each of these communities is you know, added into the account, it shows up here on the left-hand side. Uh, and this would be sort of the most recent communities viewed, and then you can go in and view all of the communities that you are currently a member of. And so that would basically be how students, once they're inside of Yellowdig, um, how students are able to jump around between communities.
And before you leave that, I think it'd be worthwhile, especially with the redesign, to show people how they might do that on a mobile device.
Yeah, so the mobile view for Yellowdig is going to look something like this. That universal navigation that I was using is available under this little hamburger. Uh, and when there's a right-hand pane, there will be a little list here. That particular page doesn't have one. But if I go to the Business 101 community, uh, there will be a similar convention for the right-hand side uh, for that right hand menu.
If you haven't experienced Yellowdig on mobile, it is now a really nice, great way to experience it. It works really well. As Brian's showing you there, it's identical on your phone.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked us, what were the motivating reasons behind the redesign. One of the biggest motivating reasons was to improve the mobile experience and enable us also to sort of easily build a standalone app, which we are currently working on. If there are any questions about that.
So let's see. I think we covered those so-called other questions. There have been a number of several really good questions that were posted in the Q&A, but I think we'll go on to points now because that was the next set of questions that we received. But rest assured, if you posted something in Q&A, we will address them. And I like them, actually. They're really cool questions.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
No, yeah. So the questions basically, I think, were ultimately about adjusting points and what happens if you feel like the points are not going the way that you want. And so I think there's a couple of things, and I'm glad you brought up that slide, Brian. This slide sort of shows how points are meant to work in general. And we have some general recommendations, which perhaps you saw when you were setting up points through the point wizard in the community. But let's talk about how points work. And generally speaking, in order to prevent procrastination and to have students create better, more interesting posts for their peers to comment on, the point system is designed to make that happen. And there are two sets of points that we have in Yellowdig, two types of points, I should say. That first set are what we call the participation points. These are the points that students get for posting, for typing effectively. And you can see them at the very top there where it says students earn points for. And so if students create a post that earns that meets a certain threshold of words, they get points for that. And if students comment on a post that meet a certain threshold of words, they get points for that. Those are the participation points. Those are the points that students get for typing. And you can adjust those. We generally recommend between 40 and 100 words for that threshold to earn points, because less than that isn't really enough to create engagement. And more than that is going to be more than students may move on to the next post before commenting because they don't necessarily feel that that they want to read something that's as long as that. That's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. So those are the participation points, and they're not what makes your community go. What makes your community go and changes that paradigm are those 3 sets of points below that, what we call the social points. I don't know if you want to highlight that or anything, Brian, on the slide.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah. And so what happens here is, whoops, that the slide switches and we don't know what we're talking about. No, what happens here is that students get points. So if Brian created a post, and he would get points. If I commented on Brian's post, I would get points. But the difference is the social points. When I comment on Brian's post, then Brian gets more points. Brian gets more points. And so what does that do? It does a couple of things. First of all, it tells Brian as the poster that if he goes in earlier in that earning period, if he does not procrastinate, that people will see his post and that they're likely to comment on it. If they comment on it, he has less work to do to get to his earning, his maximum number, his required number of points during that earning period. All right. But that's not enough. That even itself isn't enough, because Brian, who we all know, may not post something that is the most interesting or engaging or on point. Maybe it's not relevant. So just by typing something earlier in the week isn't enough to make me go in there and say, oh, that's an interesting post. I'm going to comment on that. And it's interesting enough to get me in the conversation. So Brian also learns, not only do I have to go in and post earlier, but I also have to post something that is interesting, relevant, related to the course, on point. That's what gets me, or Brian, I should say, to his point total earlier and with, frankly, less effort. And this is what creates engaging conversations. Anything you want to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that we brought this up is that some of the answers to the questions that we're going to get to are sort of based around this conceptualization of the point system. So if you've heard this before, we sort of apologize on that, but I think it's important that a couple of things that I particularly wanted to point out here is that Yellowdig's point system is intended purposely to be a single semester long assignment. And to not communicate to students that this is a weekly check the box sort of activity. When they approach it like that, they start to procrastinate to a deadline. They kind of wait around to all participate at one specific time. And a lot of the sort of bad side effects of that start to creep in. So we definitely want students to think about this as a place that they come to, they participate in regularly, hopefully multiple times per week, and that they're sharing things when they have something to share, and that they're reading things and staying interested and updated on the course as things go on, and that sort of thought process for the students we think is really important. And so when you're setting up the periodic target within the point system, which is basically like a weekly number of points that you want as a general target for those students to get each week, you should know that we are calculating actually a total goal for the full semester off of the number of periods that are in that course and the target that you put there. So it definitely probably helps to think about that total goal as being the ultimate goal. When students get there, that's when they get the grade up to 100% permanently. And what we have on top of that is a buffer, which is what ultimately establishes the maximum amount a student can earn for any given week, right? So if you want students to earn about 1,000 points a week, and you put that buffer to 30%, those students will be able to earn up to 1,300 points in any week. Or if they don't earn 1,000 points that week, they'll be able to sort of earn a little bit extra the next week to catch back up.
So in other words, I just want to interrupt there to say, in other words, they're not required to earn that 1,000 points every week, just as long as they can, ebb and flow, earn more some weeks and less the other to average out to that amount.
Right. So every point that a student earns goes into one big total goal bucket. So one misconceptualization of the point system is that students are filling individual weekly buckets. In reality, every point that a student earns in Yellowdig is earned towards that total goal for the semester. And the buffer gives them flexibility to earn those points. Um, and honestly, the only reason we have a weekly maximum in the platform at all is so that a student can't come in the first week and participate and get all of their points in 1 week, or participate in the last week, probably more likely, and get all of their points because they haven't really been engaging with the course and with the other students all throughout the semester. So the 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 idea here is not that students have to get 1,000 points every week, but the idea is that you want them to earn about 1,000 points each week, and that buffer gives them the flexibility to earn those points all throughout the course with some flexibility.
So let's think about this for a minute. When we have the question about my students are having trouble earning the right number of points or something like that. Let's break it down a little bit. What 1,000 points? Okay, it's a nebulous number. We have that there because it provides great granularity, and also it's not confusing with any kind of grade. But what does that mean? If a post is worth 250 words, 250 points, if it meets the threshold of what you're supposed to do, with no interaction, how many posts would a student have to create? And if my math is right, I think that's 4 posts, right? So, and maybe that is a lot to come up with independent thought and to come up with something that's relevant and all that kind of stuff. 4 posts. Is that too much? Well, the idea is that hopefully you're writing something that is going to be interesting to your peers. So you won't have to earn 4 total posts. Comments worth 125 points. Excuse me. Goodness gracious. Words are hard today, apparently. So, you factor that into what you're expecting from your students. That's sort of the way to look at it is, if somebody writes a good post, theoretically, they could get all of their points off of that one post. How many students would need to comment on that post to get to the student to their full point potential for that week, for that earning period, right? So it wouldn't take much. It would be what, 7 or 8 different comments on that post to get to 1,000. Again, sorry about the math, but something like that. So I guess I would sort of consider that. And I think that another thing that's important here is explaining this to students explicitly as to what the point system is for, and to sort of explain to them how they can get to those points in the the way that is going to be good for the community, but also good for them as a student, and maybe help reduce their workload a little bit.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about the point system, and people worrying about whether they can change some of the defaults or whatever. Um, and frankly, students sort of earning points that maybe if they feel like they don't deserve. I can definitely talk a little bit about style and how I think about awarding points and the way that we can traditionally get students really contributing in thoughtful ways, for sure. But I think one thing that's important to think about is the entire idea of this point system is to really change and reward behavior that you want to see. And if students that are posting really good posts are able to get more points because they get good conversations going and have students actually having good back and forth conversations, what tends to happen is students enjoy being in this community and they start interacting and ignoring points. And they feel the pressure to create good, interesting, thoughtful commentary because they're part of a community where everybody else is reacting that way. Everybody else is trying to help everybody else out. People are sharing really interesting things. And so you're actually sort of building a social contract with the other students, for all of those students. And what we end up seeing is a really strong feedback loop between, you know, you get a good volume of interesting content there, and everything starts to go in a direction where students come take it more seriously, post better content the next week, right? So it's really all about creating a reward structure that makes the community worthwhile, and then we find that a lot of the student behaviors that people worry about either never happen or start to go away.
So Brian, though, let's respond directly to the to part of the question about what you would do if you felt the need to adjust those points in the middle of the semester. And let's go into the platform and take a look at how you would do that. And excuse me, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, so in the point configuration setup, you basically set a start and an end date for your community, right? So this is the concept that Yellowdig is sort of one community for the entire course. And you can set the start and end day and times for those. Um, some people don't see this button here, but it's worthwhile checking out. This will show you each one of the sort of periods and when the reset day and time actually is for each one of those. One thing that you'll notice is that if these don't match day and time, we affix the additional days to the very first earning period. So you might want to pay attention to that, and it'll show you that um, in that view periods button. Once you've set up the time that you want the course to run, you can set whatever you want for a target number of points. We suggest using something pretty large here, like 1,000, rather than something like 10. I'll get into a little bit more about why, but I would not try to match these to your course points. I would make Yellowdig points worth a clearly different value than what you want this to be worth in your course structure. Then students immediately know that there's a currency conversion, a currency exchange. Because the reality is we don't pass points in the passback, we pass a percentage. The way that LTI works, the only thing we can pass is a percentage. So there's always a currency conversion through that percentage. And that was true in both Classic and Engage. So set a total number of points that you would want about students to earn about each week, right? Then we're computing the total point goal then based on that per period value you set and the number of periods, which in this case is 19,200 points. And if you want to adjust that total goal, you could just adjust this period target to be whatever you want it to be so that it would add up to the goal that you're looking for.
So Brian, just let's say we're in the midst of a semester and we discover that the and sometimes this happens. Instructors will value posts way more than they value comments, and that is what one of the structural things that can make it harder for students to get where they need to be. If you decided in the midst of your semester, excuse me, that you had undervalued comments and you wanted to up them to get to make it easier for people to get to those point totals, how would you do that?
Yeah, so there's really two ways that I think that I could recommend that you do that. Um, the easiest, clearest way I would say is to go into the earning rules and just increase how many points these individual things are worth, right? If these are worth more, it's easier to get to whatever the targets are. Um, and I think students will easily grasp that, right? So if you really want to make it easier for students to reach the goal because you feel like you've made it a little bit too hard, you can easily just add on to how much students can earn. Um,
And I would say that you'd probably rather err on the side of adding on to the amount that comments are worth rather than the amount that posts are worth.
Yeah, so one factor in Yellowday, and I think that everybody should hear this if they haven't, we find that almost every positive outcome is associated with what we call the conversation ratio, and that's surfaced in the platform in a couple of different places. But the conversation ratio is the number of comments per post. which is basically telling you, okay, if something gets posted in the community, how much do students actually talk about it? And that's why we call it the conversation ratio. But if you want to drive up one student behavior, I would focus on it being commenting, not posting. And the reason that we say that is, first of all, commenting is what actually connects students together and gets them, interacting and sort of enjoying each other's company, for lack of a better way of saying it. But commenting is also very highly associated with how much students read. So you can't comment and take part in a thoughtful conversation with another student without being able to read and understand what that student was talking about. And so it's actually the comments and the conversations that lead to more consumption of content. And students tend to come back to those communities more often. We find that individual students that comment more in a community versus students that don't, uh, it's the students that comment more, which get better grades, are more likely to be retained in the course, more likely to sign up for the next course. All of these things go together with sort of a high amount of commenting. So to Bob's point, give more points for commenting if you're going to overemphasize one thing versus another, for sure.
And while you're in the middle of the semester and students have been earning points up to a certain point, and then suddenly you increase this point value, what happens, or what should I click here to make sure that I, do it in a way that's going to be appropriate for the community
Yeah, so if you change these rules in this earning rules area
during
specifically,
the semester?
yeah, during the semester, that changes the rules from that point going forward in terms of how much students will earn. So you can freely change any of the values on this page, and it will only influence what students start earning after that. So one way to sort of leverage some flexibility in making changes is that these earning rules can be changed without changing anything that was already earned in the past. If you want to change things that were already earned in the past, and you want to give more points for everything that was earned previously as well, there is a recalculate points button here that will apply those earning rules to everything in the past. Right? So that'll basically just replace all of the earning rules that you had in place before and award more points if you've added points to whatever you did. One thing you should know is that's like destructive. You can't really undo it. So if you only want to change going forward, you can do that just right here. If you want to change going backward, you have to hit the recalculate points button.
So I guess it's pretty simple, but just don't click that recalculate points if you don't want to change what's happened in the past. That's really the bottom line there. But that should be allow you to create thoughtful changes in the point structure as you're moving forward. Um, I think there were a few other questions about points. I'm just scanning really quickly since we're still talking about
There
points.
was definitely a question about how to account for um, things like a week off or spring break or
Yes,
whatever,
thank
right?
you.
And this is a really common question that we get. And um, the answer to that for us is that you should just increase the buffer to allow students to earn more points flexibly in any given week, um, in order to allow them to earn ahead or behind enough. Sorry, that was um, uh, to allow students to earn more points in other weeks in order to account or be able to take off spring break, right? So the concept here, I think for us is, or the stance that I would take is, if this is supposed to be a ongoing community of students discussing course topics, and a student's on spring break and they run into something that they think is relevant to your topic, and they love being in Yellowdig so much that they want to come in and post that from their cell phone while they're on the beach, uh, great. Like I would in some ways consider that a huge win, that they felt compelled to come in and participate in this community because of something they saw or did on spring break. Um, and so we really don't want to prevent students from being able to do that. we also don't want to force students to have to come in on spring break and earn their points. And so just increasing the amount of buffer that students can earn in any other week will easily allow them to make up for spring break, or any other emergency that might come up, right? If I'm a student and I can earn enough points all throughout the semester in the weeks that I work that I end up being able to take 3 or 4 weeks off of Yellowdig, then I've still participated the same amount. I've still participated, throughout most of the course. Um, but I haven't had to participate at any specific time. And that's the part that we think actually gets students to participate really thoughtfully, is having that flexibility, right? If you have to meet a deadline and you come in, 20 minutes before the deadline, because you have to post and you have to get those points by that deadline, uh, it's not going to be the best contribution, right? So this buffer is how we think about giving flexibility. And as you increase the buffer, you really decrease the amount that any one of these weekly rollover days is any kind of deadline whatsoever. Um, so uh, I mean, we have some different recommendations on the buffer. I would traditionally recommend myself about 30%. If you have a break on top of it, I would add a little bit more. I think what we've seen in the past is that when you give students a bigger buffer, a lot of students will continue to earn a lot of points in the first few weeks, but they'll find it really valuable and they'll continue to participate even after they've reached their maximum by the end of the semester. So having a little bit bigger buffer, I would not hesitate to do that.
So there were in the pre-submitted questions, which we're almost through, which is great because there are a number of really good questions that were submitted here as well that I want to get to. One of the final questions there was about the grading period beginning the first. Someone had trouble setting up the grading period beginning the first day because of the recommendation regarding Sunday. So I just want you to, in a sentence or two, maybe address that and why that's the case.
Um, yeah. So the end of your earning periods throughout the semester are based on the last day of the course. There's a couple of reasons that we've done it that way, but essentially when you set this for the point earning end date, it sets the times for each of your rollover periods here. And there is a recommendation in the platform if you set those for a Sunday night that you not choose that date. And the reason is just based on data that we've seen. When people choose Sunday night at midnight, what students do is they perceive of that deadline as uh, basically, as sort of their weekly deadline, and everybody procrastinates until the weekend, and then comes in and completes their assignment. And if you put that deadline instead at like Friday at midnight, nobody procrastinates until Friday night to do their Yellowdig assignments. So they actually end up spreading out their participation more all throughout the week. So that's one of the reasons for that specific recommendation about not putting it on Sunday night. You can put it on Sunday night. We just don't recommend it.
All right, so I want to be conscious of the time and just get to the next question about minimum class size for Yellowdig and how points ought to be, maybe if points are changing the points is relevant for that as well. And so I think as Brian's going to say, it doesn't matter all that much, but certainly when I think I'll just add that on the smaller side, with there are less people to participate, there might be a little bit more of an enhanced role for whoever the instructor or moderator in order to get things going. But ultimately, we think that size is, well, what's the term? Size doesn't matter. I don't want to go there.
Yeah, I mean, this is I'm gonna ask questions about class size all the time. So this is actually one of the most researched questions for me because I kept feeling like there must be a real answer to this question. There must be an ideal size where we should recommend, if you have a much larger size, you break it down to this size. And maybe if you had like multiple sections, we should tell you to combine them together or something like that. I have not been able to find any evidence that there's an ideal class size, either from student behavior in the platform, like proportion of points earned, comments per pin, anything that we've been able to look at is pretty low correlations between number of students and how much they do it. I have also looked at student feedback and their student recommender scores, on whether they would recommend Yellowdig to their professors after they took it. We've not been able to find any correlation between uh, class size and student ratings of whether they would recommend it. That correlation was literally 0.008, which is almost about as close to zero as you could hope to get in any kind of random sample. So uh, I have no reason to suggest that any class size is better or worse than another. There is maybe one observation I have from talking to instructors about student responses and overall amount of behavior. So one thing I think we do see is true is that in really small class sizes, meaning 10 and under, there's less just total content. So I think students tend to visit a little bit less frequently, specifically come in and visit to see if there's new content in those communities. But it turns out that they still post about the same amount per student.
All right, and that's helpful, I think. I want to move on. I'm sorry about that, but we are running low on time. Although I assume I'm willing to stay afterwards. I assume Brian is as well. But now I'm going to move on to some of the questions that the people have submitted live here today. And the first one is from Shira. I have seen my class performance data, but have no idea how to interpret it. How do I use the data to inform what's next? So I think that's an excellent question. And I think we should head over to the community health area and some of the other areas there and talk about that. So there are a number of different uh, pieces of data, forms of data that we do collect and that you can use to inform your teaching. And it starts off on this community health page in the summary area, which shows you that metric that Brian was referring to earlier, the conversation ratio, which we consider to be probably one of the most important pieces of data here. And that's the number of comments to the number of posts. In that standard pedagogy of the instructor telling the student to respond to a prompt and then respond to two of their peers, that number would be 2. In Yellowdig, we like to see number upwards of 7. That would be 1 post, 7 comments. But beyond that, there are a few other important metrics that I'd like to show you with. First of all, in the health check area, you'll see a number of things that are useful to you. The first off would be whether or not you have configured your community in line with our general best practices, and you'll get a green check mark if you have, and it'll be a red X if you don't, and you can click for more information on each and every one of those. But below that comes, I think maybe where this question might have been generated from, sort of the various scores that your community is achieved relative to other Yellowdig communities, or perhaps depending on the number at your school, the communities at your particular institution. And there are 3 different settings, 3 different scores that we show there based on varying metrics. And the first one is the sharing score. We consider that to probably be the least important score. This is the performative score of people posting things. It doesn't indicate reading. It doesn't indicate engagement. It just shows that people are posting things. So switching over now to the listening score and the interacting score, you can see if you click on those that the various activities that are being tracked change here. So in the listening score, you're looking at the number of posts that are viewed, the number of hyperlinks that are clicked, and again, the conversation ratio, showing that people are not only posting things, but are actually reading them and looking at them. And then finally, the interacting score, which has another set of metrics, the number of connections between people in the community, the post with more than one comment. So these 2 scores in particular, the listening and interacting score, can give you some sort of sense of what's happening in your community. And I know I'm speaking fast, but I know time is also short. But beyond that, there are some other things that you can do in data. And Brian, I'd urge you to go to the, actually first to the network graph, I think would be important here. The network graph is an area that you can look in to see what the various connections are in your community, between whom and how strong those connections are. And I would zoom in on that maybe a bit, Brian, if I were you, and I'm not, but that's it. And so if you go in there and you turn on the photos, you can see who exactly is connected to who, or who is not connected to anybody, like that ugly guy there, me. And if you hover over any of these, you will get some information about that particular member of the community's interaction in the community. So this is great for seeing those people who are disconnected, like me in this community, or who have very few connections. Sometimes you'll see just a small subgroup that is communicating only with themselves, and that allows you as an instructor to interact, to reach out to those particular students and try to bring them into the community as a whole, or you know, otherwise moderate that type of behavior. Beyond that, some of the other data that is the table view, and that's particularly useful if your community is larger than, say, 50 people. The network graph becomes a little unwieldy at that point, but that can be useful as well. In the reports area under data on the left, there are a few other reports that you can use as an instructor that might be interesting to you. First of all, obviously the points report is going to show you how many points your students have earned. If you click on the log, you'll be able to see exactly what they've done to earn those particular points. But you also have the ability to, on that previous screen, download the points report as a CSV file that you can then manipulate in any way you want. There's also a member report, which would allow you to have something like 70 different metrics that you can then manipulate in Excel or whatever spreadsheet you want. One quick note about the points, the plus and minus there, is that when you click that, if you decide for some reason you want to add points to a particular student, that you can add or subtract points, but we would urge you to use that messaging feature to explain why you're doing that, to avoid problems going forward. All right.
Yeah, and that'll show up in the point log for that student, whatever explanation you gave. So, especially if there was a reason to subtract points, you might want to tell the student why you've done that. And that maybe fits into a little bit of a question that I saw in the chat, about how to prevent students from, maybe posting a comment that isn't contributing that much. What we see is that if you just correct a few student behaviors and maybe even sort of make a public announcement if there's a reason to do so, but if you correct students and kind of say, like, this is not the kind of thing, that I want you to be earning points for, I think you'll quickly see that those behaviors are curtailed quite a bit.
Brian, can you go back to the community? I think that it's relevant to show there exactly the three dots, the hamburger.
Yeah, the
The meatball, excuse
the
me.
meatball menu. Yeah. Uh, the meatball menu we're referring to here is this three dots at the top right of every post. So just so everybody knows, you can go in and edit a post if you want as an instructor. You can delete a post if you don't want it there at all. You can copy a link to be able to link anybody to a post if you want to highlight that for the community. You can add and subtract points there. That's also where you can add these accolades to add points and a visual recognition to the student's post.
Can I stop you there for just a half a second?
Sure.
So again, you see the add and subtract points there, but with regard to the accolades, that takes us to our next question, which is why I'm interrupting for that. So Theron asked, is there a way to give participation points for not, quote unquote, nonverbal content, for non-typing? And the two ways to do that are, as we pointed out, you could go in and click that meatball and hit the add or subtract points. But the other way is to use those accolades that we're talking about there. These accolades here are defined by the instructor and for whatever purpose you want. And they're a great way for an instructor to be in the community, but not be overwhelming in the community. But it also allows you to add points for any particular thing. So if you wanted to add points for somebody who posts a video or something like that, you could design one of these accolades very simply by clicking create new accolade and then giving it a label. And it could be video points. And you could give, 250 points just like you would for a post on a video accolade. So that is one way to do that. And that would be the way that you could sort of manage that in the easiest way.
And right now in the point system, there's not a way to do that automatically, but that is something that is on our. It's on my one of my top 5 wish lists for this coming uh, year. So it's something that we have talked about. We have some plans for how we're going to implement that. Um, but it is something that's on our roadmap.
Yeah, I see we're coming up against time, but like I said, Brian and I are happy to remain here. For those of you who have to take off, I believe you will be automatically provided with a link to the video recording of this, so you'll be able to see some of the things maybe that we didn't catch. But let's move on. Maria asks about I have posted and pinned my first note to the class, but don't see the drop-down menu that gives topics like introductions. So that's, as Brian knows, this is one of my topics are my favorite topic. How silly is that? So first of all, you're going to need to go into, as an instructor, topics are created by instructors, and you'd go to settings and click that topics button to create your topics. Again, very simple to do. You simply click create new topic, give it a name, and pick a color, and that's it. As Brian knows, I encourage people to make those topics required, because that will make it so that anyone who posts has to use one of those topics in posting. We generally, Maria, encourage people to align those topics to their top level syllabus subject matter, whatever those main syllabus subjects are, along with those classroom management functions like you mentioned, like introductions, questions, announcements, things like that. And when you do create those topics, when you do require those topics, it does a few things for you. First of all, again, when students are required to add those topics to any particular post, they'll be prompted to ask them. And that certainly creates an organizational structure in the community. It also makes filtering that community much easier as well. If you wanted to find all the posts under that marketing topic, all you need to do is what, Brian?
Sorry, I was paying attention to something else.
All you got to do is click that topic tag, and the feed will automatically filter on that particular topic. But the couple of other things that those topics do are it enables, well, like I said, first of all, it makes sorting easier, but it also makes the thought process of having students bring in outside content a little deeper. They have to not only say, oh, I saw this thing that's related to my class and I'm bringing it in, but they have to think about, where does this belong in my class, right? I saw an article on the election, but, and I was just going to bring it in, but maybe it goes under this Constitution tag. Maybe that makes more sense for where to put it. And again, it makes following those conversations and allowing them to ebb and flow a little bit better. The other thing that you can do, and this goes back to the question about that Shira had about data, is if you go into that, again, to the data, to that community health area that we saw, that's for you, Brian.
Sorry, I'm trying to respond to somebody. The community, where did you want me to go?
I want you to go to community health, and guess where?
Topics.
Under topics. When you go to community health and if you've required topics, or even if you haven't required topics, but certainly more value if you have required topics, you will be able to then see which of those topics your students are spending the most time on and engaging with. And again, obviously those topics which they haven't been engaged with. And this gives you the opportunity to adjust your teaching based on what you've seen. In fact, if you scroll down just a bit further, you can also see how individual students are relating to those topics. And you can reach out to those students who may or may not be spending time in those topics. So that can be really useful. So I hope, Maria, that that has answered your question. Um, William Tumlin has asked about students commenting on comments to build their points with no real original thought. Any suggestions on preventing that? And first of all, I would like to say that we've shown you a few of the tools that you can use to sort of manage that already. First of all, the ability to add or subtract points in any particular case, the ability to go into the network graph and find those clusters of students who are only interacting with each other. But perhaps the most important thing to do is setting the tone, doing that modeling in the beginning, doing an introduction video that explains that if that we're looking for a certain type of post, and frankly, that if you're not doing that, I, as the instructor, have the ability to remove those posts or to remove your points from those posts, so that doesn't happen. Hopefully, you don't necessarily want to go that route, but it is an option to do that. Any other things you want to add about the likelihood of gaming of the system, so to speak, and what to do about it, Brian?
I mean, I think just some of what I said earlier, right? When you get a community going where students are posting and having good conversations, and the tone has been set as you suggested, and I would highly sort of recommend modeling the kinds of behaviors you expect of students. I think that we tend to see relatively little off-topic stuff that is at least off-topic in any way that I would consider harmful for the community, and maybe one slight shift in how you think about some of the generation of course content here and of posts is that, again, I don't actually think uh, the generation of high quality content is nearly as important as students coming here and consuming the interesting content that is there. So, and also that there are important aspects of relationship building and building sort of a social situation here, where a little bit of off topic ends up being really healthy for getting students to work together in meaningful ways, right? If you get on a Zoom call with a colleague, you do engage in small talk, and sometimes that small talk might extend for 10 minutes into the beginning of the conversation. But because you are now sort of socially interacting with those people, you can be more productive also in other ways. So, one of the things that I would think about a little bit with this sort of community concept and the idea of the points is thinking about, whether a student's contribution is actually harmful to the community, in which case I would definitely take away points and sort of um, really directly address that, versus whether they're sort of contributing in a more social way, and maybe you can let it slide a little bit, right? And I think there's always a question of balance, and that's where sort of your comfort level and tone comes in. But as you can strike that balance and get better at it, you will definitely see that students enjoy and engage and take seriously um, the exercise without having to sort of lord over everything.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that comes up, but I think really, again, setting the tone and using the tools that you have to moderate when necessary are helpful, including the flag post tool as well. That might be the other one that you want to mention and share with.
Yeah. So the one thing that students are able to do uh, within this menu here is report a post. So you can invite students to report posts and sort of allow the community to self-police. And what will happen if somebody were to report a post is they have to provide a reason, and there's a category that they can put it into. We guessed that what those were likely to be. But once they report that post, it will show up in a flagged post area for you. The student will be notified that they had a flag of theirs posted, and that post will be pulled off of the community. You can decide to put it back if you think it was fine, but you know who reported it and you know who wrote it. Um, the student that had their post flagged doesn't know who reported it, and obviously the person that reports it stays anonymous. So
Brian,
that is one way that you can also have it be self.
Brian, with relation to that, will the instructor also get a notification that something has gone to the
Yeah,
flag?
yeah.
Okay, just wanted to
Yeah,
make
so
sure.
if a post gets flagged, you'll get a notification and it will show up in this area here.
So another question that I just saw in the chat, and apologize for not seeing that earlier, Juliet, if you're still here, that's great. Do you have, and I know Brian, you love this question, do you have any recommendations for breaking larger classes into smaller groups for some type of discussion? I've used Yellowdig classes for up to 20 or 20 students in the past, but I have more like 30 students this spring, and I'm considering incorporating some smaller group discussion in Yellowdig. I'm not sure how to do that best. Well, let's start by saying, maybe you don't want to do that. I mean, you might want to, and there might be some good reasons for it. But generally speaking, as Brian mentioned earlier, diluting that pool leads to less engagement to some degree, or it can. So think about what is it you're trying to accomplish there. That being said, Brian, go get them.
Yeah, so you can definitely use groups in settings and set a total group count for your community. And then we automatically assign students into groups randomly. Once these are set up, any new incoming students will be round robin filled into the groups to keep them about even size. So that's how that currently works. You can move students between groups. And when you have groups enabled, there's sort of two options for visibility. If public visibility is on, that just means that every time a student posts, their post will be affixed with their group name, which you can edit the group names, but their post will be affixed with the group name. But every student will be able to see it. If you have group visibility off, each of these different groups will be interacting in the community as if they were only in a community with those 3 other students. And the only exception to that is if you create a post and then students start commenting on your post, they will be able to see each other's comments on your post, but they will not be able to see each other's posts. So 2 things about that, I guess. This this public visibility switch can be toggled mid-semester. So if you wanted to have a bunch of students post individually in groups without the other groups seeing, and then you wanted all of the groups to be able to see those posts, you could flip that on. But just know that anything that's created when you make that toggle, whatever is posted to a group will become visible or not.
Just
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, just a couple of other thoughts. If you just want to have a small ad hoc type of discussion, there are a couple of other options that may suit your needs as well. First of all, there is a messaging feature in Yellowdig itself that allows students to, are you going over there? I guess you are.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were going to mention something else quickly. So.
Yeah. Which allows you to set up, private chats. Again, these are private chats, and you as the instructor, you could be included in them if you want. There's no points values associated with these. They do not have the rich graphic sort of availability and formatting there, but they are convenient for direct messaging to one-to-one or one-to-many groups. The other thing that I was going to suggest is that if these conversations don't need to be private in these smaller chats, you could use the hashtag function to create ad hoc groups and be able to follow those. So you could, write, literature group. I don't know. I got no ideas as far as creativity right now, but the hashtags are something that a group of students could create for themselves for a small group that they could follow of interest to themselves. I hope that answers your question, Juliet. And I know, Martha, you had some questions about groups as well. I'm hoping that that was useful as well. Neil asks, how can we best use Yellowdig in the Zoom classroom? And I think that's a really interesting question, Neil. So Yellowdig doesn't have a particular integration with Zoom, but the advantage that Yellowdig has is that Zoom chats are not persistent. They go away, and they're difficult at best, in my opinion, to use to begin with. If you have a Yellowdig community, that is aligned with your synchronous Zoom classroom. Certainly you can encourage your students to go to Yellowdig to create their comments as, while the Zoom class is going on. The only, I don't want to say caveat, the only thing that would, those would not update live. The students would need to refresh if they needed to see an ongoing tally of what was going on there. But whenever they create a post or a comment, it would update, so they wouldn't necessarily have to do that. Brian, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Bob is correct that that is something currently that the post will not just show up without a reload. That is something we are currently working on. You may have noticed, or some people have noticed, some of the avatars on a live community will have a green ring around it. That lets you know that that student is online currently, live or whatever. That functionality was sort of the precursor to allow us to do the kind of automatic live updating. And the messages feature now is live. So if you were sort of chatting back and forth, that one's working. We're working on doing that for posts. So that's something that should be coming pretty soon, and should really make that kind of Zoom experience pretty seamless.
So I hope that answers your question, Neil. Cynthia, I see your comment about I'd recommend using it for talking points to bring up ideas, post it, and explore more. And I'm just not sure what you're referring to there. So if you wanted to clarify that, that would be lovely. And Brian, can you see Martha's
Yeah,
comment?
question about groups. So, um, if you change the visibility setting that we were talking about, um, the 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 whether students can see the post or not, can be turned on or off. If you disable groups, it disassociates every post from the group it was originally associated with. So it wouldn't delete the posts. It would just mean that those posts would become visible to the entire community, regardless then of whether you re-enabled groups and reassigned new groups. So anything that was previously associated with a group would become like open to the community.
And so I'm just reading Cynthia's comment now. You can have your students post to Yellowdig before class. Oh, you're talking about the Zoom sessions. Okay, that makes more sense. I got it now. Sorry about that. You can have your students post to Yellowdig before class, then during class while in a Zoom session with your students. The instructor or student can bring up points and ideas brought up on that board that can be further discussed in class. That sounds excellent. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for that. And Brian, I was while I was reading that, did you mention that there is going to be some changes in the group functionality?
There is one additional change that is coming for group functionality, which is an audiences function. So currently, your option when groups are enabled as a student is that you can only post to your group. We are making it so that instructors or students will be able to either post to their group or post to the full community. Will be another option baked in here, so that you can uh, sort of parallel small group conversations where students would be able to only post to their group with this sort of full-on community um, experience where they can also choose to post to their full community. Um, so that's something that is currently being worked on. I wish I could say the exact date, but I know it's definitely in progress, and I think it's about like 90% done. So as long as it gets through Q&A, I'm hoping that'll be um, pretty relatively soon.
So that's all the questions that we've received up to this point. And what I'd like to ask at this point, first of all, I want to let you know a couple of things. First of all, I believe next Wednesday, the 26th, Brian Burdine, along with two uh, professors from the University of Michigan, will be speaking about gameful learning in a webinar that I don't happen to have the link handy for, but I'm sure you'll probably receive an email for about that. And Brian, do you want to add anything about what that is going to be?
No, I mean we're just we're they're mostly talking about sort of some of their background in gameful learning specifically, and how student self-determination helps build motivation. I think a huge part of our platform and what we're trying to enable for students is for them to have the flexibility, um, and responsibility to uh, sort of impact their own learning experience and be responsible for bringing in important relevant things. And ultimately we see that that does help build motivation and interest in the topic. And I think, if I had to say what makes Yellowdig truly work, to sort of uh, be a really important part of a course, it's that we sort of help students build some curiosity and interest in the topic that they can then carry in to various other sessions where where you're trying to teach them, and they're trying to learn.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to that session personally. The second thing that I wanted to mention is that this was about our fourth or fifth different one of these office hours Q&As, and we're hoping that you're finding them useful. But frankly, we would love some feedback. Was this session something that was worthwhile for you? Was the structure work? Is there anything else that you can imagine? Think of that would improve them. Again, keeping in mind that the limitations of the Zoom webinar sort of format, which is why we did think that it was a good idea to take the questions in advance. And our perspective, it feels like that's a way that's been going pretty well. But we'd love to hear any feedback that you might have on that. And I do want to mention that we do have another one scheduled on February 18th, I believe, at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and you'll probably be getting a notification about that. We'd love to have you back. And so if you want to add anything in the chat about whether this was a worthwhile session, that'd be lovely. Otherwise, I think we're pretty good. And you don't have to say it was a great session. You can say it was a terrible session if you want. Hopefully that's not what you'll say though.
I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Yeah.
I see somebody raise their hand, so we can
Oh,
also probably take that.
okay.